welcome to our webinar, which will cover the topic of the water footprint as an indicator facing the water cycle complexity. This webinar is organized by the Belgian Institute for Sustainability, and today we have a guest speaker from University of Liège, Professor Alain Dassargues. As a piece of information, I am recording this after the original webinar was recorded, as unfortunately we didn't capture my introduction, so we'll have to attach the two pieces together later on, so you would have the full-on webinar to follow on YouTube. Let's start with the beginning. A little recap on our end. The Institute offers a lot of services, including tools, guidelines, trainings. We support your sustainable IT strategy. We aim to serve as a reference point, but we also share knowledge and expertise, and this is exactly what we're doing today. Today, we offer this webinar and invite a guest speaker to improve some areas of knowledge that we're not so familiar with as of today. That is the water consumption of IT, and especially the methodologies behind it to calculate it and what it means and represents. But first of all, would like to thank our members, which are 75 in total today in Belgium, because thanks to them, we are able to make this webinar public and therefore free for everyone to follow and to enrich themselves with new source of knowledge. But obviously, we're not alone. We're 3 institutes in total as for now. The French one and the Swiss one. So the community is international and amounts to a number of more than 250 members today from diverse backgrounds, as you can see. To get back to the original topic of this webinar, the water consumption of IT. We first have to think about the ecological rucksack as a little reminder. As you may know by now, the 2 kilograms of your laptop that we're probably watching this webinar with is just the tip of the iceberg. To make that equipment, more than 200 kilograms of fossil fuels needed to be are being used, and more than 600 kilograms of other minerals and several thousand of liters of water. That's exactly what we're going to talk today. You might think that this connection between the water consumption and IT is a weird one, but it's very much a reality, and you may actually have heard more about it than you think, especially on the news. So therefore, I'd like to collect a few case studies or news articles that have been made public recently. You might have heard of the incident in Taiwan in 2021, where the very big water consumption of the manufacturing of semiconductors caused well, we're affected by the drought in Taiwan caused by the change of climate in the region. Due to climate change, the typhoon seasons are changing and their frequency are changing, which affected the whole industry of semiconductors. However, this is abroad in Taiwan, but we might have heard as well here in Belgium other news about one of the biggest data centers of Google that are here settled in Saint-Guilain in Belgium, which apparently is one of the most water hungry in Europe itself. More about this will be explained by Professor Alain Dassargues later on, or other consequences of the indirect negative consequences of the manufacturing of IT is obviously, especially in the manufacturing phase and the production phase, and the mining of it and the consequent pollutions of water, as you can see here on the left, polluted rivers in northern of Russia. Now, in 2015, a study was published and declared that, and actually studied the water consumption of one smartphone. This is only the manufacturing of the iPhone, so this is not the end phase or the use phase. and it amounted to a crazy amount of 12,760 liters. What this means and what this study shows is that the water footprint of an iPhone comes from different things, including the manufacturing of computer and electronic products. It comes from the extraction of raw materials that are used in your iPhone. It comes from the final assembly of your IT parts, and it also comes from the energy consumption to make it all running, this production process. Now, while this water footprint indicator is very useful for us to understand where this water actually comes from, it also actually leaves a lot of questions and answers which are critical for us to actually understand the previous case studies that I mentioned before. The questions that may raise is actually, what are different sources of such water? Is it green, blue, or gray water? How much of this water is actually lost from the local water cycle, and through which processes exactly? What about the water pollution? How much of this water is polluted, in what way? And does the concept of water footprint include volumes of water polluted when drained in rivers? Or is it just the actual volume of water directly used to make a product? And can perhaps the polluted water in turn be used throughout the supply chain of a smartphone, for example? So this is why the very methodology behind the water footprint as a concept and as an indicator is very important. And this is why we've also invited Professor Alain Dassargues to explain it for us. And this is the point where I would welcome Alain Dassargues to start talking. This is the first slide. I will cover just the first slide of his presentation, as that was missed in the recording. As you may know, I'm not the expert here. I'm not the professor, so I'll just repeat what I can see on the slide and what I've heard from his presentation. The title goes, Water Footprint Indicators Facing the Water Cycle Complexity. First of all, Alain would go on to map a global picture of water resources. As you may know, there's plenty of water on our blue marble, but unfortunately, only less than 1% is actually available fresh water from the lakes and rivers. The rest is from ice caps and glaciers, vapor in the atmosphere, and the majority is seawater. This obviously freshwater then again is unevenly distributed, which hides obviously that the less than 0.1% hides huge regional differences too. I'm not going to go on to explain more detail, as I'm afraid I'm going to say things that might not be true. But for now, this is the part where Alain will take on again.
Maybe a few words about what kind of impact we are expecting due to climate change on groundwater. Globally, more water will be evaporated in the atmosphere as the temperature is increased. We have indeed less iced water. Indeed, the consequences locally will be very depending on how the local climate will change locally, because it can have different kinds of trends. For example, in Belgium, we will have probably more or less the same amount of precipitation than now, but the temperature will be increased. And globally, we will have more evaporation due to that temperature. But there are a lot of debate about, for example, the Gulf Stream. You know that probably that some colleagues are simulating the fact that the Gulf Stream could be decreased in the future. Then in that case, it can be that in Belgium we could have less increase of temperature than in other places, and maybe less precipitation as well. So that's all those things are really uncertain at that moment. But what according to the scenario until now, we will have more evaporation. So due to the increase of temperature, indeed, we will have change in frequency and intensity of the rain events, and we will have indeed less recharge for the underground, for the aquifers. So it is a problem. And of course, beside that, the activities and the stress applied to our water resource will change, and probably we will have increase of irrigation. That is, in fact, a huge danger for our water resources. And there will be many other changes in use of water. Besides the quantity aspect, we can have also quality aspect that are often forgotten as well, due to the fact that groundwater is not to be seen, so out of sight, out of mind, and we forget very often that the contamination somewhere can contaminate, in fact, an aquifer and be a problem elsewhere, a little bit further. And as I said previously, sometimes the water that you are pumping in the underground is a very old water, especially in arid zones where you have groundwater as any water resource that is available. We are obliged to do that, but it is questioning in terms of renewability and sustainability indeed. Maybe I can follow with terminology, because there are a lot of confusion between the term used water, consumed water, produced water, and withdrawn water. So maybe we can start with the water that can be used, in fact, many times, answering different functions. And in used water, you can have water that is recycled. Usually we use this term when there is a water treatment after the first use. And water can be also reused. And we are, let's say, sticking to that term when we have no treatment after the first use. And used water is not the same that consumed water. What is consumed water? Water that is not recycled or reused locally. It means that it is the water that is leaving your water cycle locally. So it is, in fact, most often water that is evaporated or used or evapotranspired. And so it means that it is used by the plants, by the trees, by the agriculture, and so on. So this water is used by all those activities and is in fact coming back to the atmosphere. So, and also water that is transformed in food and that is exported. Indeed, it is leaving the local cycle, and so it is consumed. So there is a big difference between used water and consumed water, and that is very important, I think. Beside that, you have produced water, which is locally produced with groundwater from river, from groundwater, and that can be partially reinjected, recycled, or reused. Another part can be consumed. So produced water is not stating what is, if it's used or consumed. So it is a general term. And of course, as you can imagine, the main problem is the fact that water can end in the atmosphere. So then it is in fact leaving the local cycle of our of water. Irrigation, the water is mostly evapotranspirated and leaves the local scale basin. That's the big problem. And beside that, you have quantity and quality problem. Now I am coming to the term water footprint. So the footprint is applied. So it is a non-governmental organization that the Water Footprint Network that started to give numbers to the footprint of different goods, different products, and it is applied to water as well. So the water footprint is the total volume of fresh water that is used to produce the goods and services. Okay, so it is the total volume. So there is no difference between used or consumed, because used, it is general, in fact. This is a term general. In life cycle assessment of water, and here it's another approach. So it is an assessment from, let's say, the life cycle assessment community that is also applied to different kinds of products, different kinds of goods. That is a matrix that quantifies the potential environmental impact related to water, if we apply that for water. So it means that it is a quite different approach. And if you have a water footprint estimated by this life cycle assessment, or a water footprint expressed in terms of this definition here above, it is two different definitions, but of course that can be considered as complementary. The main point to be considered is the fact, is it a local or a global perspective? So are we seeing the things locally or globally? And we have to define also what is called green water, blue water, and gray water. And we will have also explanation about, let's say, the physical interpretations of different water stress index and different, let's say, indicators of the water, let's say, vulnerability of a region or something like that. So we will have that in the next slides. So first of all, let's start with green water. What is green water? Water that is used for plant growth from naturally available precipitation. Okay, that's clear. Blue water is in fact, water that is in rivers and lakes and groundwater. So that's, in fact, the water that is withdrawn from aquifers and rivers. And what we call gray water is the locally recycled water. But of course, if it's recycled, usually we have quality problem, quality impairment, so it costs to improve that. And so that's why it is called gray water. A few examples. Example in agriculture in Belgium until recently, mostly agriculture in Belgium was rain-fed, using, in fact, the natural soil moisture and just reducing the use of blue water. So it means that mostly green water is used for agriculture in Belgium, except when we have a very dry summer, and we had that recently. And then irrigation is starting, and then irrigation is consuming blue water. So the water footprint assessment consider green and blue mixed. So there is no distinction that is made in water footprint. But what is not said is that, for example, in Belgium, if we had no agriculture activity, if we would have a forest, for example, in place of fields, in fact, it would consume green water as well. So even more, in fact, than an agricultural activity. So it means that sometimes the fact that to have a rain-fed agriculture is better for the local water cycle than to have a forest. So it could be considered as paradoxal, but it is like that. So the pure volume water footprint assessments are robust. In fact, it is very easy. It is normally relatively easy to determine a number, but often those assessments are misleading. Maybe I can explain a little bit the local versus global perspective. In fact, the shortage of water is always a local problem. And of course, normally we should distinguish use and consumption of water. For example, groundwater pumped for domestic use is in a big part recycled in the same catchment. The water that we use in our houses is collected, and is reused probably in in the same catchment. So this is not completely consumed. A part is consumed, a small part is consumed, but not all. And that can be taken into account in the life cycle assessment if it is well done, but not in the water footprint definition, as we don't distinguish between use and consumption. In fact, what is done in the water footprint assessment is to treat water as any other goods, and we can in fact question a little bit this approach for water, because is it so important to worry about the global water quantity at the global scale of the earth? No, indeed no, because we have always the same amount of water. The water is not disappearing. So in fact, the robustness of this argumentation is relatively weak to estimate that at a global scale. Still another example, if we are using about the equivalent of 500 millimeter per year of soil moisture for vegetable production in Belgium, it is the equivalent of 500,000 cubic meter. It would be, according to the water footprint approach, less good or worse than pumping half of that amount in Mauritania. And in fact, locally, indeed, it is indeed a completely other problem in Mauritania, as if you are using groundwater in Mauritania for irrigation, it is purely blue water that you are consuming, because all will be evapotranspirated afterwards. So it means that it is not comparable due to the local availability, which is of water that is very limited in Mauritania, and that is not limited in Belgium due to a lot of green water. So the reasoning should be clearly different than for the other products. We cannot apply the same reasoning than for any goods. Maybe a few elements about what we call the hydrological cycle. You know probably then a drop of water, precipitation, P, has a choice between three ways. One is to be evapotranspirated, so coming back to the atmosphere, to evaporation, or to the use by the plant of that water, so the transpiration. That's why if ET is the evapotranspiration component that is coming back to the atmosphere. The second choice is eventually to run off, to flow until reaching the river, and then to be at the surface. So this is called the runoff. And the third way is to be infiltrated. And of course, as a groundwater specialist, I am very interested very often to that term of infiltration. And of course, the impact of climatic changes can affect those terms. If we are looking a little bit more in details, if we want to make a balance on a basin, a water balance on a basin, so we have precipitation, the P, we have storages at the surface if we have lake, for example, storage in the underground if we have a change of level in our aquifer, and runoff, this is of course at the surface, and we have evaporation. And in fact, if we are looking more in practice, more in details, it is very difficult to measure infiltration. It is very difficult to measure runoff. So what we are measuring very often is the flow rate at a given point of the river here. So this is the flux or the flow rate, which is measured at the basin outlet, for example, which is in fact adding the runoff component, the air component, and the part which is coming from groundwater. Beside that, you have the change of storage in the underground. You have also pumping in the basin and so on. So water that is going out of your local balance because you are pumping the water, you are using that water, and maybe you are injecting water in another basin. Okay, so this is the kind of equation with which I don't insist, of course, but this is the kind of things that are done for each basin everywhere in the world. Indeed, our human activities are using water, consuming water. If you take the example, for example, the cooling of an atomic power plant, of course, you are pumping a lot of water in a river, usually in a river, because it is so high flow rate that we need really a lot of water available besides the water plant, besides the power plant, and then you evaporate a small part and you re-inject another one. So the part which is evaporated is leaving, in fact, your local water balance expressed for your basin. And it is the same for example, irrigation. A big part is then evapotranspirated. Another one maybe is infiltrated, and so on and so on. And each activity, each industrial activity, each human activity can have an impact on your local balance. Then maybe a few sentences here from specialists in the world. De Marcilly was stating already that water availability is mainly a regional problem. So we will not solve the problem of other region far away. If we have too much water, it is very difficult to solve the problem of people that are at thousands of kilometers and so on. So water is not a product that is so easily to be transported. Of course, you have the connection between water, energy, and food, and so we call it the water, energy, food nexus, with multiple feedback effects, interconnection between all those activities that are linked to water, energy, and food. And of course, everybody knows that the natural resources may limit the development of our well-being. A few examples, maybe. You have heard probably already people saying around the table that 1 kilo of beef needs about 15,000 liters of water. This is a water footprint assessment, so it is clearly a robust number. But what is not said is that if the beef is raised on a rain-fed, non-irrigated grassland, the impact can be even positive on the local water balance with respect to, for example, another land use like forest. In our region, most of this amount is green water. Of course, if your beef is coming from Argentina or from arid zones, it is another story. 1 kilo of tomatoes needs 214 liters of water, according to the water footprint assessment. Okay, this is clearly the case because most often tomatoes are coming from, let's say, arid or semi-arid region, or from the Netherlands or Belgium in greenhouses. And greenhouses, of course, are pumping a lot of water in the rivers and groundwater in order to make those tomatoes ready in a good timing. So most of this amount is blue water. So I think personally that it is more serious for tomatoes than for beef in our country. But sometimes it is not only blue water which is consumed by greenhouses and in arid regions, it is sometimes gray water that can be consumed as well. So it could be in some places water that is reused or recycled. If I take an example of your domain, data center of Saint-Guillain, as Sarah said, is consuming a lot of water, and there were some press release recently. I've seen that in Le Soir as much so 1.44 million cubic meter per year. It seems a lot, and the equivalent of let's say 10,000, a little more than 10,000 households. Okay, what is we have to look that a little bit more in details. In fact, if you are looking to what they are doing, 70% would be evaporated. It's a lot. So it would be better to re-inject more hot water in the environment than to evaporate a big part. When you evaporate a big part, it means that it is leaving the local cycle. So about 1 million of cubic meter is consumed. So it means that this is leaving our balance in our local basin. For domestic, what is this comparison with the households is somewhat biasing, I think, because for domestic use we need water that is of very high quality. So in fact, for domestic use, we use drinking water, blue water, while in fact, in practice, Saint-Guillain is consuming water from a canal, which is mostly grey water already. So that must be said normally, because it is not the same, that has not the same value in terms of environment impact. So the local specificities could be huge in the local availability of grey and blue waters during indeed the dry period. So it means that during the dry period, some regions have problems, other no problem. So that's really the case in Europe and everywhere in the world. And one of the most negative processes is irrigation. As it increases the evapotranspiration, you give the water to your plants, to your agricultural activities, and you boost the evapotranspiration. And so the water is leaving your local cycle. So it is fundamental to distinguish between rain-fed agriculture and irrigated agriculture. If a product is produced by rain-fed agriculture, there is no worry, in my opinion. If it is produced by irrigated agriculture, that's another problem. And as I said previously, in our regions in Belgium, agriculture consumes less water than the natural land use, and it is a study from our colleagues from the KU Leuven. And you can see here the average evapotranspiration of a forest during a long period, during 25 years. And you can see that globally it is higher than the evapotranspiration of croplands. So it means that and they have made the study more in details for different kinds of croplands and so on and so on. So that's showing that, in fact, sometimes croplands for the water balance could be better than forest. So that's, of course, forest have indeed other advantages in terms of environment globally. So grey water could be important, and it is not taken, and this I remind you, it is not taken into account in the water footprint assessment. And of course, grey water, reused, recycled water, in fact, we are very dependent on the local development and organization in a region. So it means that in some countries, the grey water use is not really well organized, and of course it could be expensive also to organize that. as we know, with purification and of water that is polluted. Okay. I just want to insist a little bit more about life cycle assessment, because I have not said a lot about that until now. In fact, in the life cycle assessment framework applied to water, but it is applied to any kinds of goods or any kinds of products, there are always a phase of definition of the study. And the important thing is to point out the fact that in this definition of the study and selection of the objectives of the study, there are some special boundary and special details. It means that the life cycle assessment approach and inventory accounts for local scale aspect, which is indeed very important for water, as you can imagine, and as I explained before. There is a phase of inventory, of course, inventory of the flows for water consumption, pollution, and including location aspects. So the local aspects are very important, and of course the impact assessment is made in function of local conditions. So you can see that the term local is coming many times in this assessment framework. Indeed, this framework is quite more complex than just giving, as for water footprint, a number which is a volume of water which is used. Here, in fact, it is more intricate, it is more complex, and of course, as it is more complex, it can be considered as less robust because, in fact, it can become relatively subjective in function of who is assessing this life cycle assessment. So it means that this life cycle assessment framework is very good because it is detailed and well, let's say, designed, but it is more complex to understand it, and it is more complex to build it and can be considered as subjective for some extent. Beside that, and I will finish my talk with those aspects. There are a lot of water stress index that are let's say explained in the media. In fact, they are not so explained, but what the media explain you is Belgium is very vulnerable for water, and what happens, and so on and so on. So let's be curious and cautious and rigorous about those indicators, simplified indicators. Of course, we need simplified indicators, but in fact, there are a lot of different organizations that are publishing water scarcity, so water scarcity index or vulnerability to water shortage and things like that. And of course, all those organizations are starting with an obvious sense of goodwill, in fact, but sometimes we are losing so much about the physical consistency that this is leading to empirical and subjective index as well. And I would like to take just one example because it was published in the media recently. It is the example of the World Resource Institute, a big name, making regularly the headlines in the media. But be careful with those indicators, and I will explain why. They are publishing water stress country rankings with regards to the water quantity related risk. And they have published that for a long time already, 10 years. And each time they are making the headlines in the media, and at the end they are in fact publishing very nice maps like that, So you can see in red the extremely high water stress countries or regions, and globally, well, it seems relatively logical with regards to what we know about arid zones and or semi-arid zones. If you are looking to the map, more in detail to the map that they are publishing for Europe and the north of Africa, there are some things that are relatively logic, but there are things that are relatively curious. If you are looking to Belgium, especially, you see this dark red color, extremely high water stress region. It means that for them here in Belgium, we are in an extremely high water stressed region, which is completely wrong, in fact, with regards relatively with regards to other countries, as you can imagine. And in their ranking, and because they are making ranking, you can see that Belgium is more stressed than Niger, or is more stressed than Namibia, or is more stressed than Tunisia, Algeria, Syria, and so on. So it is a little bit strange for somebody like me that is in that domain of the water resources, and of course the headlines of the media are in line with what they published. But then I made the exercise to investigate a little bit what is below this indicator. First, what is the World Resource Institute? In fact, it is an American private foundation funded by American donors, including the Democratic Party, Coca-Cola, and many others. Maybe Microsoft is part of it, and Google, I don't know. But there are plenty of members. What scientifically, the work is not peer-reviewed, and the index that they are using here for this water stress is in fact a ratio between the annual water use of a country, of a region, on the annual renewable water availability per country or region. You see this index. It seems relatively logical in terms of a great for the public that annual water use, of course, that's what we need, in fact, and that can evolve in time, and the renewability of our water resource. So this index seems relatively logical to the general public, but in fact, it is not measuring the water stress that we have in the region. And I will explain why. Why there is a problem. First, water use is here assimilated to water consumption. So all water that is used is considered as completely consumed, what is not really the case. And as I explained before, we should have this distinction between consumption and use, because a lot of water can be recycled locally. And the index itself, and this is maybe more important, the index itself is biased. What is this ratio? Water use on renewable availability of water. Imagine a country that is very arid, like Mauritania, like Niger, like Mali, and so on. Of course, the water use has been forced in the past to be greatly reduced due to the lack of availability of water resources. So it means that the country that are stressed at the moment, they have a water use which is very limited because they have availability of water that is very limited. So it means that the numerator and the denominator of your fraction, of your ratio, are evolving parallelly, in a parallel way. So it means that your ratio is biased because your water use was already adapted to the lack of availability. So in the reality, countries like Niger, Mali, and so on are much more water stressed than Belgium, as you can imagine, even though it is not reflected in this index. So it means that this index, this indicator is not the appropriate one to really estimate if we are stressed or if we will be stressed in the future for with climate change aspect. And if you are looking more in details, but I don't want to pass too much time on that. For example, the estimation for the nighttime water consumption is based on satellite images quantifying the nighttime lighting. So it means that in Belgium, where we have a lot of our highways, and until recently, our highways were illuminated during the whole night. So it means that we are considered as high consumer of water due to that fact. So this is really the kind of estimation that is not so robust. And another aspect, the cooling water from nuclear power, if you take Doel on the scale, in fact, the nuclear power plant is taking water in the Scheldt, which is an estuary. The water is a mix of fresh water and seawater. This pumping of water has absolutely no effect on our water resources in Belgium. And of course, the amount of water is huge. So if you introduce that cooling water from the nuclear point in the consumed water, of course, it is changing a lot of things for our indicator. And that's explaining why Belgium was so water stressed according to that organization. And I'm stopping with that. So the indicator itself is biased, and the way to build this indicator can be criticized as well. So it means that other indicators should be developed that are probably more complex, but maybe more, let's say, reliable. And I'm finishing with messages to take home because I'm very long here. And renewability of fresh water can only be assessed at a local scale. So always consider a local scale is more consistent, is more robust than considering a global scale or a very regional scale. We have to distinguish between water consumption and water use or water production or water withdrawals. And water consumption is mainly evapotranspiration and also, why not, water that is included in some products that are exported. So it is when your water is leaving your local water cycle that we have consumption. In terms of water footprint and water life cycle assessment, it is very important to distinguish blue, green, and gray waters. As I said, it is important to think local water balance. I've already said, sorry. Water issues are not only a quantity problem, but also a quality problem. I had no time to address that, but of course, quality is also something that is very important. Water shortages are due to the, let's say, uneven spatial and temporal distribution of fresh water. And very often also the management is very important. And if you have an inadequate management of the water distribution, for example, you can have some problems at the first stress period. Considerable impacts of climate and other changes on the water cycle are expected, including in Western European countries, but it is quite dependent on what kind of future climate we will have locally. And many things are still to be done to maintain the quantity and quality of our fresh groundwater and surface water resources. Indeed, I think that you are convinced about that. And of course, the first priority is to try to have a clear and rigorous communication and not to communicate with index or indicators that are so simplified that they are wrong. And I finished with that, and I thank you very much for your attention. And I'm really excited to have some questions and to try to answer.
Thank you very much, Alain, for this great presentation. Very insightful. And I hope we all learned a lot of new things today. We did have a few questions already in the chat. If it's okay with you, I'll now enable all of you to put your microphones and your camera on. And I'll just start with the questions that have been asked in the chat already, and then afterwards people can just jump in and ask their question. There was one question from Cristobal. I don't know if you want to ask it immediately, or I can just say it here. What is your opinion then on the greenhouses in Almeria in south of Spain, which is called the plastic sea because of how many of them there are? Yeah, that was a question. Oh, wait, I think you need to unmute.
So it is a question about Almeria and...
Okay, the question was, what is your opinion on the greenhouses in Almeria in south of Spain,
I see that.
Called the plastic sea?
Okay, yeah, I visited there. It's a nightmare. Really, it's a nightmare. Tomatoes are produced, and other things that tomatoes as well, are tomatoes in greenhouses, and they need a lot of water, and they are pumping a lot the aquifers there below. And in fact, there is a problem of, they are creating also seawater intrusion in the aquifers under the land surface. And it means that the water is more and more salinized. This is more and more salted water that is pumped. And so the problem is really, really huge in that area. So indeed, production of tomatoes and strawberries and other projects in Almeria is a nightmare at the moment, in terms of environmental impact and in terms of water use. And in that case, a lot is consumed.
Okay.
Okay,
I hope that...
if I can continue on the question, it's because I'm surprised that this has become so big. Because if it was this bad for the environment, which from your presentation I understand why it is, but then why putting so many of these greenhouses there? I mean, aren't there the conditions maybe perfect for growing that aside from water? Or why? What is the reason that they have put so many of these greenhouses in that specific region of the world, which is a very, very arid region?
Yeah, I agree with your questioning. In fact, at the beginning, they had a very nice groundwater resources. In fact, the underground there is relatively permeable, and so that's very easy to pump. And they have, of course, the sun, and of course the production is relatively easy. And with the greenhouse, it is accelerated even. And of course, the production aspect and the economical aspect has taken the lead on that activity. And maybe also they are in a position where they can attract maybe a lot of people with low salaries and things like that. And yeah, all those aspects together make that they made a situation which is really a nightmare in terms of environmental impact and water resources impact. And I discussed that with a local professor of hydrogeology in Malaga, and also the colleague of there is a colleague also in Almeria, and they are desperate about the situation, I would say, and I don't know how to solve it.
Okay.
I have to be honest.
Thank you.
There was another question from Maria Jose, who said, how would the water footprint be for beef produced in those macro farms?
It depends probably where are located those micro farms. if it's in an arid region, if you use a lot of blue water, then the impact will be high. Of course, if you have those micro farms in a region where there is a lot of rain, natural rain, and on a regular basis, then you have probably the impact which will be less important because you are using more green water. And that's all. And you can use also maybe gray water as well. But all is locally dependent. In here, I am looking that only on the perspective of water use. Those micro farms can be evaluated in terms of other impact on the environment. Of course, there are a lot of other impact in terms of quality also of the environment. You can imagine that the quantity of pollution from those macro farms can be huge if it is not well managed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. There's one question from Olivier that I think I should answer. It's already 12:02, so if you obviously it finishes at 12:15, so if you have to go, no problem. But Olivier, if you have some time, I would like to answer that one. You just asked, could we have a short and pragmatic explanation of why so much water is needed to produce a smartphone? Extraction need water, okay, but what about manufacturing? And in fact, there's very little research about the water consumption of IT, and this is why we invited Alain in the first place to come here to just discuss about the methodology itself. What I can tell you about the manufacturing itself, for example, I know I just sent you the report about the water footprint, but I don't think that really mentions a lot about the manufacturing itself. So I'll send you afterwards the article about Taiwan and what's happening in Taiwan with semiconductors and this industry. And from what I've read, you really need a lot of purified water to produce those semiconductors. And because of new technologies, you also need a lot of water to cool down the equipment and the machine itself, which is overheating. But then again, taking the water footprint in consideration, we should listen to what Alain said today. Obviously, where does the water come from? What kind of water is it? Is it green, blue, or gray? And can we reuse it? And is it really lost in the local cycle? With what's happening in Taiwan, because of climate change and because of the changes in frequencies of the typhoons, they don't actually have the water they used to have to use that water to cool down their machines. And what they do now is they really take they take in trucks of water, so that's pure blue water to cool down their machines, which, as Alain said today, is the worst form to use your water because it's completely taking that water from another cycle, obviously. I will send you that article if that interests you. This is very much as to also answer Marie at the end. Can you tell us more about your thoughts on the evolution of water use of the IT sector? This is something we clearly want to investigate and don't have the answers for it. And I've been trying to write an article about this topic, and I just needed Alain's youth help to just understand what the water footprint was. So once I do have more information, you will all be notified, and I'll make sure to share everything about the data we can gather. But what I can say now is that no, we don't have the answers, unfortunately. If there's
Maybe I can add something, Sarah, about that, because in fact, evolution of water use, for example, in the data center, if we are looking to, in fact, if you are using for cooling, what is the classical use, cooling, then you are warming your water, and eventually you are evapotranspirating it. You are evaporating it. So it means that is not good to evaporate it. So if you can increase the proportion of, let's say, hot water that is reused or recycled somewhere in your basin, could be good. And in the same time, there are maybe some buildings in the neighborhoods that can use the heat of your hot water. So coupling, for example, a data center with, let's say, residential, a new residential quarter where you need some heat, especially during winter, could be a win-win situation for everybody. And I think those kinds of situations are emerging more and more in our land use problematic, that to couple different kind of user of water. And of course, if you are reusing this water coming from the cooling of a data center, it could be a heat production coming in your network, and can be great in some places. So all those things could be, let's say, path to better practice, I think. And we see that even in my university campus, we have a data center, we have a computer center producing too much heat. And just beside this computer center, there is a building which is really not well, let's say, isolated for the winters, and they need a lot of heat. So that must be coupled. That's really evident.
Yeah. Yeah. Another question then, still talking about data centers. Arjen asked, is 70% evaporation of water in data centers, as you mentioned in the case of Saint-Gilin, about the water lost / consumed, is that an estimate across all data centers, or is it specific to this size? Was just
in fact, I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know.
okay.
I don't know. That's what I read. So be careful with that. That's what I read, and we know that that about 70% is yes, it's a lot which is consumed because it is leaving our water local cycle, and it could be better to have less evaporation. Clearly.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's a general case of if it is usual. Yeah, I'm not from this sector, so I cannot answer to that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for clarifying the concept already. I think that was the most useful part. I don't know if there's any other questions from the audience now.
Yeah. Yes, I have one. I put it
Go
as a
ahead.
comment. I should have put it as a question. This study between the water, I mean, between the forest and the croplands, the fact that when you have croplands, you may use less water than when you have a forest. Is that only for rain-fed intensive regions such as Belgium, for example? Or is it also the case for example, the southern part in the Mediterranean, and Italy, Greece, Spain, and so on and so forth?
No, be careful. It's for Belgium.
It's for Belgium, yeah, good. Okay.
It's for Belgium. And I said, you have to pay attention that when we are dealing with water, all is local.
Yeah.
And what is true somewhere is not especially true elsewhere. For example, I had some colleagues, they published a paper on the fact that it is better to have a city without trees for the recharge of the aquifers. But locally, they had a data set showing that under a small city of Switzerland, they had a better recharge as the city was developing more and more with more concrete and less, let's say, nature, which is a little bit special. And other studies are showing just the other way, because they are in another context. So all those things are really local. So here it is a study of the KU Leuven. I think the crops that they have taken as reference are mainly located in Flanders, and they Well, they have seen that, but
Okay.
in the south of France, probably it's already something else.
Okay, okay, clear. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, remarks, or case studies they want to share? Okay.
Okay.
Okay, then. Well, then I'm going to thank Alain for his presentation today. If you have any questions to Alain or to me, please reach out. I'm sure there will be questions. I will still have questions perhaps later on. If we do have more information about the water consumption of IT itself, you will be notified. Don't worry, this is not the end of this story. This is just the start of a little research we're trying to conduct. Thank you everyone for assisting and attending this webinar, and we hope to see you at our next one. Have a nice day.